Ah, the medieval French monarchy. A grand parade of kings with their fair share of triumphs, scandals, and occasionally cursed reputations. But none perhaps more infamous than Philip IV of France. In fact, one bishop had quite a colorful description for him. Bernard Sayset said of Philip, "He is neither man nor beast, he is a statue." Ouch. Now, if you thought medieval kings were all about gallantry and chivalry, oh boy, Philip's reign is going to knock that romanticized image straight off its horse. So what was the deal with this most accursed king of France? And why did he end up with such an unflattering legacy? So Philip IV of France, often referred to as Philip the Fair, but don't let the nickname fool you. It's not referring to his sense of justice, but rather his looks. Turns out this 14th century king was quite the looker, with flowing blonde hair and a regal demeanor. But if you think his charming appearance meant he had a sunny personality, I've got bad news for you. But before we get into the juicy bits, let's set the scene. Philip IV ascended to the throne in 1285, at the tender age of 17, inheriting a kingdom that was doing not so great. The economy was shaky, the aristocracy was restless, and oh yeah, the Templars were sitting on a mountain of gold, while Philip was not. But despite all that, Philip wasn't the kind of king to sit back and let things fall apart. He had plans. What kind of plans, you ask? They squeeze every coin out of everyone. Philip had expensive ambitions. He wanted to solidify France's dominance in Europe, and wars aren't exactly cheap. So he turned to the church, the nobles, and anyone else who wasn't paying their fair share, at least in his eyes. But his story isn't one of some shrewd, beloved ruler. It's more of a tale of a man who, through sheer force of will, managed to step on nearly everyone's toes. By the end of his reign, he had earned quite the nickname, Le Roi Maudit, the Cursed King. Not exactly an award-winning title. So how does one go from being Philip the Fair to Philip the Cursed? Let's talk about his relationship with the Catholic Church. Now, if history teaches us anything, it's that kings and popes don't always get along. Philip, though, took that to a whole new level. You see, Philip had a bit of a cash flow problem. Wars with England and Flanders drained the royal treasury, and naturally, Philip figured the church, sitting on vast wealth, should help out. After all, what's the church for if not for helping its kings with war funds? Pope Boniface VIII, however, didn't quite see things that way. When Philip began taxing the clergy, Boniface fired off a papal bull, essentially saying, "Stop it." Philip, in turn, escalated. He not only ignored the bull, but also accused Boniface of all kinds of wrongdoings. It all came to a head when Philip's goons literally kidnapped the Pope. Yes, kidnapped him. Boniface was so shaken that he died shortly afterward. Philip had essentially killed the Pope by proxy. If you're counting, that's a strike 1 on the curse scale. Now, we can't talk about Philip IV without mentioning one of the most notorious events of his reign, the trial and execution of the Knights Templar. Let's be honest, this is one of those medieval events that screams I desperately need money. The Knights Templar, if you're unfamiliar, were a medieval religious military order that had gotten really rich over centuries. They were basically the bankers of Europe, and Philip had debts that, shall we say, he wasn't planning on paying. So in 1307, he had hundreds of Templars arrested in a massive, coordinated operation. The charges, heresy, witchcraft, you name it, basically everything. But the real reason was clear. Philip wanted their fortune. In a series of show trials that stretched on for years, the Templars were tortured, forced to confess to bizarre crimes, and eventually executed. Their leader, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in 1314. According to legend, as the flames consumed him, de Molay cursed Philip and his descendants, proclaiming that both the king and Pope Clement V, who was the puppet of Philip and backed him up, would join him before the year was out. And wouldn't you know it, both Philip and Clement died within months of each other in the same year. Coincidence or Templar curse? Either way, in my opinion, that's a strike 2 on the curse scale. But beside that, Philip didn't get quite so much cash from the Templars as he hoped. Turns out their fortune was more in assets than in actual gold. So whoops on that one. Now if you thought that was all, hold on to your crowns because we've got one more scandal to unravel. The Tour de Nesle affair. Picture this. Philip IV had a couple of daughter-in-laws, and the last thing you want in a medieval kingdom is a juicy scandal involving the royal family. So what's a king to do when rumors start swirling about the infidelity of his daughters-in-law? Well, if you are Philip IV, you launch an investigation that turns into a full-blown mess. It all started with the two wives of Philip's sons, Louis and Philip, being accused of having affairs, rumors that suggested they were getting cozy with a few knights. Philip IV never wanted to shy away from drama, had the Tour de Nesle, a royal tower, turned into a royal interrogation chamber. In a classic case of let's air our dirty laundry, he rounded up several nobles and accused them of the unthinkable. But the scandal didn't stop there. The accused women, Blanche and Margaret of Burgundy, were subjected to some serious medieval interrogation tactics, leading to all sorts of wild confessions and accusations flying around. Blanche and Margaret, the accused women, were both imprisoned and remained behind bars, even when their husbands ascended to the throne as kings. Now this whole royal debacle didn't just affect Philip. It cast a shadow over his descendants too, contributing to yet another curse. You see, all three of Philip's sons, Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV, took turns as kings, but none of them managed to secure a lasting male heir. Louis X had a posthumous son, but the poor child only survived for a mere 4 days. This dynastic disaster set the stage for a much bigger crisis, the 100 Years' War. But that's a story for another day. But here's the thing, if you remember, Jacques de Molay didn't just curse Philip, he cursed his entire bloodline. And wouldn't you know it, the curse seemed to have hit its mark, with all three sons failing to continue the dynasty. The Capetian line came to a screeching halt. It's like fate itself conspired against them, ensuring the cursed king reputation stuck to Philip like glue. Strike 3 on the curse scale. Now when you read about Philip, it becomes clear that for all his political cunning, the man wasn't exactly warm. Bernard Saysay may have been onto something. Philip wasn't exactly human in his approach, cold, calculating and unforgiving. A statue if ever there was one. He didn't need to charm people, he just needed to outmaneuver them. And boy did he do that. His reign saw the consolidation of royal power like never before. He expanded the royal administration, made sure the nobility was kept in line, and essentially turned France into the bureaucratic powerhouse it would remain for centuries. Philip IV may have died in 1314, but his actions would echo throughout French history for centuries. In many ways, Philip was ahead of his time in how he centralized royal power and controlled the nobility, but he also left behind a legacy of bitterness and curses. So what was the deal with Philip IV of France? He was a calculating, icy ruler who saw his kingdom as a ledger and his people as entries to be taxed. His reign wasn't filled with great battles or grand conquests, but with political maneuvering, financial schemes, and the occasional arrest of a pope. In the end, the statue king left a legacy of centralized power, but at the cost of making quite a few enemies, and probably some curses along the way. If you enjoyed this video on the life of Philip IV, cursed as he may be, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of kings, wars, and the chaotic history that shaped Europe. Until the next time.